I'd like to ask council members to take their seats. We're going to begin our informal session today. Our first order of business is a presentation of the Tier 1 Financial Future of California Company. And I would like Mayor Jones to give us a brief introduction of all the resolutions.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Madam President, Madam Vice President, members of council. Delighted to be able to come before you today, and perhaps this is one of the most, if not the most important of my new beginnings, the new start of planning for our long-term financial future. I believe that City Council has taken seriously its financial responsibilities to manage its money wisely, both generating revenues and spending on necessary services. But I think it's important for us to say today that we are in a unique moment in time. We are in a dire economy, the worst economy since the Great Depression, and it's important for us to begin now plotting our pathway to the future. We know that the economic downturn is not over, and it is uncertain as to when the rebound will take place. And so during this time, the best thing we can do is to tighten our fiscal belts, assess our finances, and develop a bold plan moving into the future by setting our goals now and then implementing those goals as time marches on. And so today, I want to begin the process of what I'd like to call our Tier 1 plan. First, one of the things that I've said is that we want to become a Tier 1 city. And we're not going to get there by just wanting it. We've got to plan strategically on how to get there, and it's certainly going to cost some sacrifice. And one way to become a Tier 1 city is to upgrade our bond rating and strive for a AAA bond rating. We've done extremely well in the past. We are respected by the bond rating agencies. But one way for us to prove and to allow others to know that we mean business about being a Tier 1 city is to go all the way and to become a AAA bond rated city. This is not going to be easy. It's going to take several years. However, we can begin making strides to upgrading our bond rating step by step. Secondly, a way to improve our financial status is by tightening our belts in bad times. Families all over Richmond, all over America for that matter, are doing the same thing, and as a city we've got to do the same thing. All of us want everything all the time, but that's just not going to happen in this economy. We need to maintain and even grow our reserves and control our spending. It's not going to be easy, but if we work together, we can do it. Thirdly, another way we improve our bond rating is to show a willingness to make tough choices, determining what services we need, and then providing the resources to provide them. We'll be looking at tough choices later on this month during the budget process. It will not be easy, but that's what we were elected to do, and that's why we're paid the big bucks. Fourth, this may surprise some of you, but some of what bond rating agencies look at doesn't have anything to do with money. Things that good cities do are things that have value to the bond rating agencies. Some of those things are working collaboratively. The agencies actually look at whether the mayor and the council work together. Addressing social ills, dealing with crime problems, working to reduce poverty. Some of these things don't cost money, but these are things that are looked at by the bond rating agencies. These are things that affect us financially, and we have both moral and financial reasons to address these problems. Now, the most important thing I want to say today is that this is not going to just be the administration's program, nor is it going to be just City Council's program, but the message to the entire organization is that we've got to begin from top to bottom to digest this notion of accountability and fiscal responsibility. And so I'm asking all city departments and agencies to work to help us maintain and attain our best financial status. It's not just a priority for the finance department, but it's got to be a priority for all of the agencies of the city. I've been working with Chris Bechler and Michael Terry in reviewing our financial future, and I've asked our outside financial advisors Davenport and Company, David Rose and Roland Cooch. All right, I was going to say that, but I wasn't going to say it unless somebody told me to. David Cooch to be here today to walk you through a very important and timely overview of our finances and debt needs for the future. And I'm going to ask you to listen carefully to the observations and to the advice. Together we can do great things. Together we can make Richmond the Tier 1 city that we all know it can be. And so at this time, Madam President, David Rose, if you will come forward and make your presentation.
Thank you, and welcome, Mr. Rose.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I will start my remarks in a moment, but before I do, each of you will receive a handout, which is about ½ a pound, and the mayor did a wonderful job of eloquently and succinctly doing what will probably take me 6 or 8 hours, but I'll bring it down to about a ½ hour. Again, I'll just wait for a moment if I could. Does everyone have a copy? Okay. Again, thank you for the opportunity. My name is David Rose, and I'm with Davenport and Company. We've had the good fortune of working with the city for about a decade now, and we are here to try to underscore those things the mayor has said. In fact, since I saw the mayor about a week or so ago when we had this presentation, Chris and Suzette actually had us present to the entire department heads last Friday as part of that strategy to bring the entire government structure into focus with this objective that you have indicated, because again, it has many, many positives, and hopefully we can just go through a few of those today. If you would, page 1 is just a table of contents. Because of all the materials, the way it's laid out, there is a goals and objectives page I will talk about. And then what I'd like to do for the next few minutes is really provide you the executive summary and several pages that are tied to that. There is detail behind all of that in the appendices. So again, we're not expecting to resolve anything today, but again, to start that dialogue that the mayor has indicated. If you would then turn to page 3 under goals and objectives, and we've laid out about 6 or 7 of those, the last of which perhaps should be the first, and that is to become the first urban city in Virginia to be designated AAA. Again, we are the premier city, we are the capital city, and again, with all of the resources and all the things happening, there's no reason why we cannot be a AAA city if we do the things that the mayor is talking about and follow through in those over the next several years. With that said, we jump to the very top. Part of the goals and objectives of being here this afternoon was to give you, this new administration and council, an executive briefing on the financial status of the city. The second thing, as you can see there, is talking about some opportunities for further city investments based upon the city's current and future debt capacity, and I'll explain that a little further. The third thing is to provide you an outline of the city's compliance with a series of self-imposed key financial policies, as well as what we call in our industry best practices. And again, those are guidelines to get us to the mode of being a AAA. And as the mayor indicated, we are already now strongly rated, but we can go higher. And fully following the best practices and tightening those things will help us move towards that direction. The fourth goal and objective is to identify non-taxpayer revenue sources, doing certain things more efficiently, being shovel-ready for the various stimulus programs and funds that are out there or could be out there. Those are the types of things we're talking about. Management efficiencies, so again, we can have a better handle on our finances month to month, so that again, we can move as quickly as possible when things either get better, or to the extent they don't get better nationally, we can be prepared for that and what that means for future budgets. Then the fifth thing, and this is very timely, as the mayor knows, we want to formally introduce the city with the new mayor and this new council to the national credit rating agencies. Having said that, next week we are actually having all 3 national credit rating agencies come to Richmond. Many of them have not seen the city in a year or two, and we'd like to introduce them as well as certain representatives from city council if they're able to come, and again, start that dialogue and let them know right up front that we intend to become AAA and that we need their partnership and we need their counsel as to what do we do to get there. I think we know well the things we need to do, but we need to start the dialogue. And I think, again, as the mayor said, it's not just a collaborative effort between local government here and other governments, but it's a collaborative effort with our government here, our administration and city council. So we need to do that. We have some work to do to catch up in that regard. And again, that's an opportunity next week to do all that. And then last point there, as I said, number 6, we need to, in a sense, leverage the opportunity of the mayor's vision. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the details of that in the next couple of minutes. So if you would, turn to tab 2. I'm going to use the executive summary on page 4 and 5 as our launching point for our discussion today. You'll notice on the far right-hand side of each of those bullet points, there's roughly, I think, 11 of them, 9 of them, excuse me. We have pages tied to that, and that's why we thought today, rather than put this up on the screen, we could go back and forth as appropriate and highlight certain things that we're trying to make in terms of that executive summary. Once again, even though we've got certain pages identified, behind all those pages, literally, in the appendix, is all the details of the numbers, or many of the details of the numbers, that underscore how we got to some of these conclusions. So if I could begin, the first point that we made is that the city enjoys, as we quote unquote, a very strong investment grade credit ratings from all 3 agencies, for both what we call the general obligation or tax supported debt, as well as the utility enterprise funds, which are revenue bonds. And if you would turn to page 6, what you can see under page 6 is an overview of all the rating categories that are designated by the 3 national rating agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch. What you'll notice is that, again, the city has 2 distinct types of ratings: general obligation bonds, that's the tax supported, and the utility revenue bonds, that's the self-supported enterprise funds. So for someone like myself who pays into the water and sewer system, the utilities, my fees and services that I receive, I pay every month, that supports the utility revenue bonds. So they are self-supporting, as they're called. Now you'll notice there that we are in that second tier that's called very strong. That's not our term, that's the rating agency's term. And you'll notice in there that in the general obligation bonds, 2 of the 3 are right in the middle of that AA category, as we call it. One is at the lower end. And then on the utility revenue bonds, we're in that AA category, but again, across the board at the lower end. What we've seen over the last several years is there have been 4 distinct upgrades by the city. We've actually moved from the 3rd tier to a large extent over the last decade into that 2nd tier. And the goal of the mayor and all of us here is to move into that highest tier. So as I said, there is no city that's an urban city in Virginia that's in that highest tier. And our goal is to get there. Chesterfield and Rico County, they are in that highest category. They're in that AAA tier. Hanover County has 1 of the 3 agencies in that highest tier. Again, we see about a half dozen counties in Virginia are in that highest tier, but there's essentially no urban cities in that highest category. Okay? If you go to page 7, I just underscored that we've had 4 credit rating upgrades since 2001. Since Dr. Jameson sort of took over, if you would, from that time. And again, on page 8, though, we get into what it takes to get to a AAA. And the mayor succinctly said several of these things, and I'd just like to point those out because all of those we have control over. Some take years, some may take months, but we have control over all of these to some extent. The first is to strengthen and enhance some financial policy guidelines Those are the best management practices I talked about. And we're going to talk a little about a time frame to do that. The second, again, seemingly would not be financial, but of course it is, and that is to minimize the numbers of our citizens here in Richmond that live below the poverty level. If I'm not mistaken, when the rating agencies do their report, here in the Southeast, we're considered a southeastern city. We are the second highest, or have been the second highest city below the poverty level, second only to New Orleans. And that is a challenge for all of us. So again, that will keep us from getting a AAA, so we need to work on that. There's a number of things that we can do indirectly, such as education for teen pregnancy, things like that, that directly impact poverty levels. So there are strategies that can be done there, and we care a whole lot about that. Third, again, increasing regional cooperation. We are not here in an island. We're part of an overall community. And again, that is something that the rating agencies and we all recognize, that we live together, we die together. And the key is to strive to live together. The fourth is to eliminate what's called a revenue anticipation note. And what that simply means is that the way the city's tax structure is set, we annually have to do revenue anticipation note borrowing. It's another way of saying the city has to do the equivalent of a payday loan to get us through our year. That's something we have to avoid or minimize. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. The next is to increase our annual funding for pensions and something funny called OPEB liabilities. What's that mean? That's other post-employment benefits, and that's basically for those folks that have retired, taking care of those retirees and having enough money set aside actuarially so that as future employees of the city retire, there'll be enough money there. We need to up that. In that regard, we're no different than virtually every city in Virginia, big and small, urban and rural. But again, that's something we have to continue to do. And then finally, to get to that AAA, we need to develop a multi-phase, multi-year plan that incorporates all of these things, as well as an overall capital program. Now, you go to page 9. Someone said to us, well, what are the advantages or disadvantages, if there are any, of becoming a AAA community? In reality, there really are no disadvantages, except to say, the mayor said, well, that you need to belt tighten. As a result, for example, the two disadvantages, if you want to call them that, is that we would have to think about maintaining or lowering some of our debt levels over the years. Again, living within our means and then some. So perhaps not having a full credit card, an open book, if you want to see that as a disadvantage, we don't. But again, you might look at that in the short term. The second thing is to recognize that we need to further increase the cash flow, even at a difficult time that we're in right now, as the economics nationally are such. But we need to do that in terms of being able to have more cash flow, to be able to better withstand difficult environments. In addition, we need to increase what we call our undesignated fund balance, or another way of saying it, our rainy day fund. And we've done a very good job of that since 2001, but it's basically held steady. You'll see that in a few minutes. We need to up that again to another threshold if we're going to get to the AAA. The advantages there, I don't think I need to belabor those, but bottom line, from our perspective, is a Tier 1 city, a AAA city. What that basically is the gold standard. And I think if we get to AAA, or when we get to AAA, it leaves no doubt in anybody's mind Richmond is then looked at with the highest cities in the country. We may not have the population, but we're going to have that prestige. We're going to have that medal, if you would, so that when things like economic development, localities, companies are looking at localities, they recognize that Richmond, there is no questions. It's simply your AAA. All those issues of finances are then checked off the box from economic development. So again, that's the points we'd like to make there. There is on page 10 then a pathway, and that pathway begins with where we are today and the mayor outlining his vision for the AAAs, working with all of you and with all of us. Continuing to increase that regional cooperation as the mayor has done and seeing the other local governments, he's in the process of doing that. And the third thing, which is being done as we speak right now, with the finance department is we are enhancing and improving financial reporting. It seems to me that that was a weakness in the past, and that weakness needs to become strength. I'm pleased to say that there has already been in progress with the staff, and we reviewed it, that there has been increased financial reporting, and that process is working because, again, you need to know every month where you stand relative to the previous month, relative to a year ago, that type of thing, and that has not historically been available here. And so, again, to the extent that occurs, the dialogue that can occur between all of us, everyone in the room, will be that much better, including all the department heads. So again, we see that as critical here as we finish the 2009 fiscal year. Then in 2010 fiscal year, which is, again, is only a few months away, looking at a top-down review of all of your financial policy guidelines. I will jump ahead and tell you we are in compliance with all our financial policy guidelines, but that doesn't mean that we have the full complement of necessary financial policy guidelines. What we have, we're doing a good job with, but some of those can be strengthened, some of them need to be amended, and as a result of that, we recommend doing that starting right after July 1, if not sooner. The second thing is a strategy towards getting rid of, if you would, that revenue anticipation note. How do we do that? That's to look seriously at twice-a-year real estate billing. That's something that's going to take a time for our citizens. It's something that's going to take a time for the staff. But the goal here is if we start that process in 2010 and look at that, we do the various things that are necessary, we could hopefully implement that in 2011, certainly by 2012. That will have multiple impacts. First of all, it will actually help reduce the expenditure side of the budget because in any given year, depending upon interest rates, we borrow about $70 to $75 million of short-term money, and it costs us upwards of $2 million plus just to pay for that payday loan, if you would. So getting rid of that is a win always around. And I must be honest, I don't know a single AAA local government that has a short-term borrowing by need. They may do it by desire for certain reasons, but they don't do it as I know it by need. Then the third point we'd like to make in 2010, it seems so far away, but it really is only a few months away, so I think that's the important thing, hitting the ground running, is to take a thorough review of the historic practices in terms of actual capital funding. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, but suffice it to say, we're in a mode right now where our historic practices have not been dovetailed with what you have every year and require to have, which is your capital improvement program. And so we need to get those to mesh together, and there could be no better time to do that, especially when we're looking at stimulus monies out there potentially, and we're also looking at, again, a very difficult economic environment. So we think those things would be necessary on top of all of the usual capital funding that's necessary in 2010. Then 2011, we're looking at, again, implementation, ideally, of some of those things. And again, one of the things I mentioned earlier, the plans, putting them into place and implementing them as you really get comfortable with each other in terms of the reduction of poverty, moving towards that goal. And then finally, as you can see, 2012 and beyond, is carrying through and demonstrating that the things that we accomplish are not one-year wonders, but are sustainable. One of the things about the rating agencies is they all like to see roughly a 3-year track record of things that you do. So for example, if we are successful in one of the recommendations that we make that is approved upon is to increase our undesignated fund balance, to go up, if you would, in our rainy day fund, they want to see that you not only do that, but you keep it at that level for a period of 3 years, as opposed to increase it 1 year, only to pull back the next. So again, I've spent a bunch of time on the first point. I'll go quicker on some of the others, but just wanted to underscore, because I think that sets the tone for why we're here today. The second point is to make sure that we recognize that the city, as I said earlier, has complied with its self-imposed, that's the key word here, self-imposed debt-related policies as well as some other policies. and that the utility enterprise fund, for example, remains strong and self-determining. It doesn't require any funding from the general fund. And so again, on page 11, for example, you can see the various policies. I'm not going to go into them for time today, but there are about a half dozen different policies. And that green on the bottom is just to let you know that you're in compliance. And as you get used to this document as a working document, later on in the appendices is actually the breakout of each of these particular ratios, and you can actually see year to year how you're in compliance with that. So again, as I flip back and forth, just wanted you to be aware of that. The third point is, as I mentioned, that city's rainy day fund. That's in effect, we call that formally the undesignated fund balance, and that is a credit strength of the city. But again, if we are going to get to a AAA, we know we have to continue to maintain that, if not enhance that. And if you go to page 12, what you can see is that back in 2001, we made a recommendation that was taken up by council and approved, that the city increase its rainy day fund from 5% of the overall revenues of the city up to 7%. We are there today. We've been in compliance, but again, if we're going to go higher, we may want to think about a plan to move upwards to roughly about 10% over time. Sorry. If you go to page 13, that's just some more of the details in policy, and again, the appendices have some more details, which we include, by the way, in the appendices, how you compare to other urban cities as well as to Chesterfield, and Henrico, and Hanover. Again, trying to give you a sense of what they all look like. Going back to page 4, I mentioned earlier, under topic 4, what the city's debt capacity is. And what do I mean by debt capacity? Well, let me take a step back and tell you that the city has, as you know, a multi-year, 5-6 year capital improvement program. That program, what was approved by the prior council for fiscal year 2009 to, I believe, 2014, that program identified approximately $380 million of capital that would be spent. Of that $380 million, $360 million was contemplated or is contemplated to be borrowed. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things that AAA local government does, that's essentially a complete borrowing program. One of the things a AAA program does is bring down that amount of borrowing, if you would, and bring up the amount of equity or cash flow. And that's going to be one of our challenges to sort of implement over the next couple, 3 years, especially in tight times. But having said that, what we wanted to give you all as a perspective, and this is what I would say, if you turn to page 14. If you go to page 14, what we're seeing is the anticipated, as they call it, spend plan over the next 5 years contemplates an average of about $70+ million a year to be spent in borrowing. That's approximately the average, 72 to be exact. But that's what we're looking at. Now, having said that, the question is, keeping within our current policies, not exceeding them, how much more borrowing for whatever projects could we do if we kept within that spend plan? And the answer is, we could do about another $80 million over the next 5 years. That's if we kept within that spending. But if you turn to page 15, what you'll find is over the last 5 years, we have actually spent roughly half that amount of money. Roughly $35 million, $38 million has actually been spent over the last 5 years. What that says to us is that if, and this is the key word, if you were to continue on the same spending path, how much capacity of projects could you possibly add to that $360 million that's been borrowed? You probably could add about $150 million. Why? Because again, those projects would be spent beyond 2014. They would go out maybe to 2017, 2018. And the only point we're trying to make here is that your historic spending and your planned spending have really been very different. On top of that, you do have the ability, and this is one of our recommendations for 2010, is to take a hard look at where all the various projects are that have been identified in that 2009 program and say to ourselves, do we really care? Is this the top priority? And where does that stand? How many dollars have already been committed? How many are shovel-ready that are priorities? You have that ability collectively. That's what we told the mayor, that literally we have about $400 million of debt capacity in the AA category. It probably jumps down, or drops down, I should say, to probably about $300 million if we're looking at moving towards the AAA. That's basically the numbers. So in that range, $300 to $400 million of debt capacity we have over the next 5 years. And that's the message today, because of that CIP that was approved last year, only a fraction of that is shovel-ready to go, if you would. And again, all of this we're talking about is all about general fund projects. This is separate and distinct from the utility projects, which again are even larger in terms of magnitude. But those are different because those are self-supporting. They don't in any way impinge on your ability to do debt in the general fund. So again, we're talking about two different things. I just want to make that clear. So, okay. If we go then to page 4 again, under Executive Summary Topic 5, we just wanted to give you a little bit of an education on the way the city actually does its debt issuance. The first there is those utility enterprise fund revenue bonds. As I mentioned, the rating agencies will be down here next week. We are planning to sell about $150 million of true revenue bonds as part of our ongoing program. The way the city's utility enterprise fund has worked, and it's worked very well, is to basically go to market roughly every 2 years to get the efficiencies, economies of scale, meet federal tax code laws that allow us to borrow on a tax-exempt basis. And so if you go back, and you'll see a little bit later in our booklet here, every couple of years we issue about $150 million or thereabouts in terms of new money. And that's part of the overall plan. A lot of that is to continue to meet the various regulatory requirements, and I think I point that out. It's literally, and Chris may want to correct me, but I think 60 or 65% of all of the utility work that's done, as borrowings are done, are all on required plans, whether it's the Chesapeake Bay Act or other DEQ requirements. The other thing I would point out, just to give you a frame of reference, as I mentioned earlier, almost all of that $380 million of our capital program for the general fund is borrowed. In the case of the utilities, roughly a third, 25+%, is actually cash funded. So we're doing in the utility system what we want to do in the general fund. That practice, that discipline, if you would, the rate structure is already built in. So again, there's good cash flow. And that's what we want to get to here with regard to the general fund. The second point is, and this is one of those examples of something we'd like to be able to eliminate over time, and that is the equipment notes, or a large amount of the equipment notes. What are those? Those are basically short-term borrowings, relatively short-term borrowings, 5 to 7 years, for things like fleet, vehicles, equipment, and we do about $5 to $6 million a year of those short-term notes. One of the things that we like to recommend, and we will do in our plan working with y'all, is to be in a mode where, to the extent we can phase those out, make that cash funded. That's the type of thing I'm talking about, where we increase $4 to $6 million a year every year, and over 5 years, that's $30 million thereabouts to buffer, to increase the overall cash flows of the city. And that's the type of things that we want to recommend, but it's going to take some time to get the budgets in a mode to be able to do that. The third thing I just talked about earlier, general obligation bonds. Those are the traditional long-term bonds. When I said to you earlier, we look at issuing roughly $70 million a year over the next 5 years. That's what I'm talking about. Basically, those general obligation bonds with the equipment notes, those collectively are about $72 million. That's the spend plan averaging. Then the last thing, or the second last thing, commercial paper program. what that really is the way in which the previous administration looked at trying to do a series of projects when the debt capacity was tight. We ended up doing a commercial paper. That's simply put, that's an interim financing strategy. Something we may want to entertain. It's been good in terms of interest rates. It's been good in terms of the mechanism. But again, it's not something that we rely upon for the long term. It's just simply a funding mechanism for the short run for various needs. Ostensibly, that was the city of the future. Many of those were school programs that were in the gestation phase, just being talked about. And then finally, the revenue anticipation bill. That is a requirement. That's the $75 million that I mentioned that we have to do. It is out there for less than 1 year as required by law. And again, that is our that's our payday fund, if you would. That's the note we want to eliminate as much as possible, if not altogether, during this administration's time frame. I'll stop for a moment. Any questions? I know I'm trying to move very quickly, Madam President. I know there's a whole lot here, and I apologize.
Do you want questions now, or do you want us to hold them to the end?
If you want to hold them to the end, or if there's something burning, by all means, but I just...
Let's hold them to the end.
Okay, that's fine. All right. By that time, I'll be done, and my partner, who knows a lot more than I do anyway, he can answer the tough questions. So I'll be happy to answer as well. Number 6, and this is a very, very important point. At the end of the calendar year, basically roughly December 31, there was an estimate by the staff that there would be a shortfall of upwards of $13 million by fiscal year end, meaning June 30th. We are now currently talking and strategizing about various ways to make sure that we finish this fiscal year in balance, not a shortfall, and ideally, that's the key here, ideally not having to tap into that rainy day fund, which is basically upwards of about $47 million. So the goal is not to have to tap into any of it and keep a balanced budget. And that's where the folks are going in terms of all of that. Page 5. To that end, on number 7, the Department of Finance is working on a series of things, and we wanted you to be aware of that. And as I mentioned earlier, enhanced financial reporting will be the type of thing that will allow us in the future to know month to month, not have to wait till December 31, see the results come January or early February and say, guess what? We're short by several millions of dollars. These are the tracking reports that if you're in the private sector and you run a company like Macy's or something, you see those tracking reports every week of what happened the previous week. You can then compare that. You can see if there's an erosion in sales. You can see if there's an erosion. And the same thing would happen for us. The goal would be we can see how we're doing year to year, month to month with regard to sales taxes and other things. And that will be, again, a critical thing. And that's being made more refined as we speak. The second thing, as I mentioned earlier, is to refine the overall way in which we look at our debt capacity and look at our capital program. Because clearly we know there are any number of needs that you all have or want. The private sector, the public sector, they're all competing for limited dollars. The third, and it's already started under this mayor, is to continue to be aware of and to take advantage of any of the possible stimulus monies. I will say at this point, as of literally a couple of days ago, we saw some of the monies start to be identified, certain things, and I'm not an expert on it, but for programmatic things in the school side, that appears. Some other things, again, it's not my expertise, but we are monitoring and tracking that because, again, there's still a whole lot left in terms of specificity from the federal government as to really what that's going to mean dollars-wise on the capital side. And that's what I'm talking about here when I address this. I'm talking about the capital side of things, the construction side of things. And we don't know a whole lot more than we did a few weeks ago. In addition, we're looking at, as we mentioned earlier, a plan to move to twice-a-year tax collections, and that, again, as I mentioned earlier, to reduce or eliminate that revenue anticipation note. We call that a RAM. And then finally, we're also working to evaluate, enhance those debt management policies, which I suspect at a later date will come back to this body and make recommendations as to what we think they should be, and take your input as it relates to all of that. Last couple of points, and then I'll be done. We have identified a series of potential savings opportunities. I will tell you, when we put this document together a few weeks ago, the marketplace looked a little better. As those of you see, there is continued fear and concern in the credit markets. We're seeing that. That's what we think, to a large extent, the drop-off of the market was over the last, literally the last 10, 12 trading sessions. But nevertheless, we're positioning ourselves to save any possible money, any time of year, as it relates to possible refinancing, again, for purely savings purposes, some of the debt that's outstanding across all the various areas, whether it's the utility side or whether it's the general fund, and we're looking at that. In addition, we just wanted you to know that as we come to, as the 9th point, this upcoming financing, this utility revenue bond financing, we just want to underscore that full introduction of things such as this, the mayor and the council, and our goals and our desires, and that's what we really wanted to point out today. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions from my colleague, and if we can't have any answers for you, we'll certainly get those answers for you quickly, and we appreciate the opportunity, Madam President.
David, any questions? Did this mean,
Thank you, Madam President. I can hear, as you know, off on the side rim of what was said.
this can't be seen.
Pardon me?
This can't be seen.
I can't be seen, but I can hear. So just was listening intently while I was out of the room. Thank you for the presentation. My question is with regard to the poverty level. Could you quantify the percent of the grade, if you will, that is attributed to that?
Whether it's correct or incorrect, and I'll say what I mean by that. The rating agencies, when we went back to 2001, their number, as they determined what they call the poverty level, was roughly 24% What they have seen, and the latest statistics that they had, they generally agree that it was in and around 20%. So that was the numbers that they had looked at. So they saw a reduction in that poverty level, but still, again, 1 in 5 citizens by their statistics. And I can get what they view as their statistics, but those that you asked me if I could quantify, that's the numbers. You know that by heart.
And would, of that number, I'm sorry, Madam President, may I follow? What I guess more refined my question is, of what the rating agencies take into consideration of these various ratios, et cetera, of cash flow and what have you. Does can you quantify what the poverty level is, the impact of that on the overall rating? Is that 5% of the consideration? Is it 10? Is it completely intangible?
I think it's somewhat of a black box. The one thing they do not do, for example, is maybe a little bit like applying to colleges. You know, if you've got a son or daughter like mine at VCU, I don't know if VCU and the admissions office has a specific that says 10% is your grade point average, 20% is SATs, 25% is extracurricular. We've never seen anything like that. But it may exist. I don't think it does. But I do think it's the old sort of straw that broke the camel's back. I think everything else that we do is on a AAA level. But we can't get that poverty level down appreciably. It may not get us to AAA. They may say, you know what, just cannot get there because 1 out of every 5 citizens then is in need of some form of governmental support. Their mindset would mean that then 80% of the citizens have to carry right along 100% of the citizens. And they're always looking at stress testing. They're always saying, if things go badly, you know, how can we help? How can the city help itself? How can the citizens? It's one of the reasons why you don't tend to see AAA local governments that have very modest populations, because they want to see, again, a broader brush of numbers and strength those numbers, that mindset. So I don't think there's an absolute that says 20% or 80% or 50% is poverty, as part of the overall equation. I don't think there is. We can ask, and I would suggest
Right.
that may be one of the questions that the mayor may want to ask, say, help me a little bit, meaning me, the mayor, help me, what do you see? And then we get some insights from that. We'll make a note of that.
A couple of years ago, we gave, it was mentioned in this chamber that you could buy into with particular issuances by buying issuances of debt, that you could purchase a AAA bond rating by paying a premium for that particular issuance done on a case-by-case basis. Is that even available now given the current market?
Well, let me say two things. Number one, it is not available right now. What Councilman is talking about is really a financial decision, and we've used that in the past here at the city, particularly on the utility side, where for a premium up front, when you do a financing, you will spend X dollars, and you will then be so noted when the rating agencies when there were private companies out there that said, fine, for X dollars, you will turn around and become AAA rated. Now, to become AAA rated, obviously you had to do more than just pay a fee. You had to start with a solid credit rating. So we're eligible for that. But again, those entities have now gone by the wayside. Maybe they'll get reconstituted. There is some talk about that. But for us, meaning here in Virginia, there really is no longer a true AAA across the board. There's some that have split ratings, but that's not the same cachet as the pure AAAs that existed literally a year ago. On top of that, though, let me be clear. When certain local governments talk about having AAA debt because they buy a premium, I think you all know that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about being a AAA by being, in effect, buying into ourselves, by doing what we need to do, and not by having some third-party private sector company. And of course, that's purely just a good economic decision, and it was a very good program. I would say, just for whatever it's worth, those AAAs did not die because their programs didn't make sense. They really got whipsawed by other parts of their business hurting them, not by local governments.
Okay. Thank you, Madam President.
Ms. Robertson?
Thank you very much. My mic is kind of slow coming in. It's operating like I'm operating today. It's on a delayed mode, so I hope you can hear me.
I can.
First of all, I want to thank you for this presentation. And I want to thank the mayor for having this presentation made to us. I think that the kind of information that you're sharing provides us really with a very good roadmap to start looking at financials in a comprehensive way. And lots of the things that you've said have been things that I know that we've talked about in the past. One, going to taxing twice a year instead of once a year. We had quite a bit of discussion on that last year, and at that time, each time that I think that we've had this discussion, it seems like something that was just impossible to make happen. So I'm very excited, Mr. Mayor, that that's something that you want to see happen. And I think that certainly will make a big difference as it relates to this short-term borrowing that we've always had to do. And I really do like a lot of the recommendations, the changes in reportings and those kinds of things. And I think that all of that would be helpful in helping us to collectively look at the decisions. Certainly the poverty issue is something that we've been talking about recently. This council has adopted legislation to put in place an anti-poverty commission. And some of the research that we have done today shows that we are at just about 23% for poverty. And so certainly, Mr. Mayor, we are in the process of trying to work through how's the best way to handle this poverty issue, even though we are in the process of considering appointing an anti-poverty commission I do think that this is something that we probably need to come to the table and talk about more specifically to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. It's a major challenge, and certainly I don't think that is something that the council and the council staff can handle in the way that it needs to be handled. So it's there. Again, I think this is a grand opportunity for us to look at this in a comprehensive way. Matter of fact, the president and I had lunch today just to talk about poverty in the city of Richmond specifically. So the other thing that always is a real problem for us, that I don't know that we even began to fully appreciate the impact, and that is our retirement fund and our COLA for our retirees. And every year we're challenged with that coming up as an added on expense because of how our system is set up. And certainly anything that we can do to try to address that problem. And one final thing, the stimulus funds, I know there are mixed emotions about that. We're happy to receive them and we know what we can get. But we are a little bit concerned about 1 year stimulus fund, what kind of impact that's going to have on us with that volume of money that is coming in, and how that may negatively impact us if we don't make some critical decision on what kinds of things we're spending that funding on, and don't lock ourselves in a position that next year, from what I've been told, next year's revenue is going to be really tough. And I'm a little nervous about the bandage impact that the stimulus fund could have and create an even greater negative impact for us futuristically if we don't think very critically about doing it. So I am very happy to have you to work along with the city and provide us with this very detailed roadmap. And as the chair of the Finance Committee, certainly we welcome the opportunity to work on behalf of the full council to help make sure that these recommendations are being carried out.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Mr. Jewell?
Thank you, Madam President. Mayor Jones, thank you for bringing this presentation. Needless to say, with the delay in the budget, I've been a little anxious. You probably heard me jump up and down over this thing. But this is an important start. Boys in the Hood call it Joe Needy. When Joe Needy hits you, we can and need to get very creative on how we spend money and how we manage our fiscal health. And this really might be a good opportunity for us to rethink how we have been managing these dollars. For instance, I met with a gentleman this morning who talked about the, I believe it is, Virginia School Board Foundation. That Richmond borrowed from it some years ago, but we haven't borrowed from it in quite some time. Money's available at far less cost than perhaps what we've been spending in the past. We met with the judges at the juvenile court over a month ago. Chief Norwood's here. We're aware that our crime rate is plummeting, thank God, overall, but our juvenile crime is going up. But we've been cutting Rec and Parks budget for 20 years, and then we ask, why do they act like that? Our courts are asking us for more resources, but in this economic tsunami climate, I don't know that we've got it anymore. However, if we spent money differently, we could take that pressure off the courts by reducing their caseloads. They agree. There are any number of things we can do differently this time around. And these hard times give us the opportunity and yes, the impetus to do just that. And so this is a good time to get at this. The poverty rate, we talk about tipping points. Well, families have tipping points in their budgets. Having to give children not only lunch money. But we get money and allowances. These kids have an opportunity to make their own money. It would reduce that parent's chance of getting to the tipping point where they can't pull off another dime out of that budget, or they can't pay rent. And there are things like that. The homeless situation, where if we put homeless prevention in place to keep a family from being evicted by just simply paying $100 that they're short on their electric bill, knowing that the building commissioner will condemn that house if the electricity isn't cut off. They got to move. So it's a lot easier to keep them in the house than it is to try and find them housing once they're out. So I'm just saying there are different things that we can do here, and I'm glad you brought these to our attention as we approach, hopefully, your new beginning this week.
Thank you, Mr. Joel. Is there anyone else with a question? Is that sort of what we do? Mr. Keller, is this a question?
No political statements?
Okay, question, thank you.
I do have a couple of questions. First of all, Mr. Mayor, thank you for this presentation. I think it's probably the most comprehensive presentation I've seen on finance since I've been on council in the past 2 years. So for that, I'm very thankful to see this today. The one concern I have is, and I agree with the concept of Rand borrowing and getting out of that business. The one concern I have is the fact that we're going to have homeowners potentially paying 1.5 payments in a single calendar year. And I know in a mortgage situation, I'm paying on a monthly basis by an escrow account. But there are a lot of folks that I know who've reached the end of their mortgage payments. For them, it's a good thing, and they basically pay their bill once a year. They write that check for that amount, and so that means there's going to be adjustment. Have you looked at the impact that is going to have, or how many folks fall into that category?
We have not yet looked at the specifics of that, but that's why we're thinking about using just the beginning 2009 fiscal year, just at least, if you want to call it a trial balloon. I'm not a politician, you know, but at least to start the dialogue here. And then we're thinking about 2010, figuring out what is exactly the mechanics of all that, what's the true cost, what's the true benefit. Because if you'll notice, I said, Mr. Tyler, one of the things is to try to reduce, if not eliminate. I mean, I don't believe, but preliminarily, we can get all the way towards elimination, but we may have to take, again, those steps that are necessary. So the thought was 2010, take a hard look at that, figure out what has to be done. It possibly might take 2010 and 11 to start getting the citizenry ready for what may then occur if it takes to 2012. It's that type of thing, as you say, that we may have to sort of put into the hopper and get that working. But I do think that all the citizens collectively will be better off, not only with the loss is the right word here, of having to pay interest, on stuff that you don't get any benefit out of. So that we'd like to lose that.
Okay. All right, thank you. The second question I have deals with the capital improvement projects. And what I'm hearing you say, two things, and I want to make sure I understood this correctly. That basically you're looking at reducing the capital improvement projects and following the more historic nature of about $38 to $40 million a year, as opposed to the 70 to 80 million that we've shown in the capital improvement budget?
No, that's not, and maybe I didn't say this well enough. No, what I was really saying, no, I'm not suggesting a reduction like that at all. What I am suggesting is that we take a hard look at just the overall process of how those projects are even finding their way into the capital improvement program and what years they find them there. And then we also simultaneously look at where are they in the scheme of things. Meaning, for example, when the City of the Future program was created and that commercial paper program was started out, there was a $150 million capacity. A very small amount of that was actually tapped into early on, it's increased. But the idea is to try to figure out where within the realm of all those 380 million of projects, what is really the cash flows of those. And then if we understand that, then we come back to what are your priorities? And if one of your priorities are to try as best as possible to increase that credit rating, then we may want to make some recommendations that say, you know what, while legally is wrong, while practically, you can do 360 million or another 80 on top of that, say 400 plus million of projects, practically speaking, you may want to think about reducing that down to 300 million and give yourself a cushion. Now, we need to also figure out, are there certain things under court order or near court order, such as the overall jail, that is going to be that big elephant in the room? Not the only elephant here. I mean, there's a big elephant here.
The last question I have deals with it, again, the CIP. Do you have a formula for the capital improvement projects where you think we should be funding with our dollars? You mentioned that the utility department is roughly funding $25 million a year out of their 150, if I heard correctly.
Actually, 25%.
25, they're using 25%. So what you're suggesting to us today is that we need to go from 100% borrowing on our capital improvement projects to maybe borrowing 75 and funding 25%.
Well, I want to be careful. I did not give a percentage for the general fund. And I think that to the extent that we ever got to a point where we did 25%, then I think a lot of these other issues would no longer be issues, because that would be a very large percentage. But we typically see very strong communities have anywhere from 10% to 15% of their capital program. And again, it depends sometimes on the type of program. For example, if we should find ourselves in a given year where we may average, and that's the key word here, if we're averaging $300 million or $350 million capital program over 5 years, the key is to take a look at the average of how much cash is used over 5 years, not necessarily 1 year only, because that 1 year we may find there's one particularly very large project that lends itself to being funded by debt. It could be something like the jail. That'll be undoubtedly, I suspect, a large singular project. So we want to be careful. We don't look at a 1 year period. We look at a multi-year period, and then we step back and say, did we achieve our objectives? Which is why I think, as the mayor said, this will take several years. This is not going to happen overnight. And that's just the reality of it, because it's a wholesale evolution of the city here that we're talking about.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, any other questions? I want to thank you very much for bringing this plan to us, and I'm sure that you're going to come back to us with more details and how we're going to get to, but this is really an exciting plan. And I also want to thank the mayor for having the vision in these really tough economic times to think ahead and begin to move us forward to hopefully the triple-A bond, which would be just really awesome. So thank you for your hard work, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for having us here and bringing it to us. Thank you. We look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, next on our agenda are board vacancies. We usually do these at our organizational development. We have a couple of boards that need members ASAP, and due to Mother Nature and the snow, we didn't meet Monday, so we take a couple of minutes to do that right now.
All of the applicants before you have gone through the various standing committees and have all been approved by the standing committee. Finance approved the appointment of Thomas A. Silvestri. I need to know the vote of the body, whether you agree with his appointment going forward. Okay?
All right, is there any objection to Thomas Silvestri?
His writing or
Actually, and now that Will's left the room, I get it out. All right, all in favor of Mr. Silvestri going forward for the, do we have to vote on these?
No, you don't.
Okay, we're good with that.
Okay. The next one, Public Safety approved the reappointment of James Harris, Clarence Jenkins, David E. Cheek, J. Stephen Buss, Wilson Washington, Susan Hanson, Kelly Horn, and Esther Windmiller.
Are there any comments on any of these candidates?
Those are all reappointments.
All reappointments? All right, we're good.
Okay. They also approved the appointment of Matthew Geary and Irvin C. Wright to the Capital Area Alcohol Safety Action Program.
Any comments on these two? Okay.
Okay. Land Use approved the appointments of Glenn Hudson, Robert W. Robin Miller, Andrew Ney, and Marsha Reed Woody to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Oversight Board.
Any comments on any of these candidates?
Madam President.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm just sending an email to Ms. Ali as well as to the city attorney indicating that I have a conflict of interest with Mr. Miller's appointment, so I will not be voting or opining on that nomination. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hilbert. Without Mr. Hilbert, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Hilbert.
City Planning Commission, Land Use recommended the reappointment of Charles Ray and the appointment of Amy Howard.
Any comment on either of these candidates? Okay.
And finally, Health and Human Services supports the reappointment of Napoleon Peoples and the appointment of Jolie Mintzmoyer to the Richmond Behavioral Health Authority.
Any comments on any of these candidates? All right, thanks.
Those are all of the appointments and reappointments. Those papers will be introduced this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next we have Dr. Review.
Item number 1, ordinance number 2009-11, to amend the code to ensure compliance with the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation concerning Chesapeake Bay preservation areas. Council amended and continued to the March 9th meeting.
Any questions? Okay.
Item number 2, ordinance number 2009-14, to direct the sale of surplus real estate at 1204 North 22nd Street to Richmond Affordable Housing for $14,000. Planning did not meet due to the weather. This paper is to be continued on the 23rd.
Thank you.
Item number 3, ordinance number 2009-15, to authorize 5408 and 5410 Patterson Avenue to expand the size of the building, increasing the number of parking spaces at the west end branch of the Richmond Public Library. This paper was also not heard at planning due to the weather, so it will be continued to the 23rd.
Thanks.
Item number 4, ordinance number 2009-21, to set the rate of personal property tax relief for qualifying vehicles in the 2009 tax year. Government also forwarded to council with no recommendation. This is to be moved to the regular agenda.
And this document, I know Mr. Tyler, you had a question about this paper?
Yes.
Would you like to ask him this time? Is there anyone from administration to fill us in? Thanks. Would you like to do a serious question first, and maybe you can make it quick? Mr. Tyler, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have some.
All right, go for it.
First of all, on this paper, I'd like to know what was collected last year.
Mr. Tyler, do you mean the percentage or the amount?
The amount. And what's being anticipated this year with this change?
The amount of tax being collected?
I mean, just to be clear about this, because this is one of those papers when you read it, you have to be careful of what you're reading, because what's happened is every vehicle basically under $20,000 has to pay a tax. Over $20,000, you pay 100% tax on the value of the car, correct? Under $20,000, you pay a percentage based on the rate we set here.
That's correct.
And somewhere in my notes, my belief is we're moving this up 2% from prior year. So we're increasing the tax rate on citizens who own cars $20,000 and below.
We are lowering the tax relief percentage from 58%.
Which means we're going to increase the tax burden on the citizen.
Given the decrease for the average vehicle, the assessed vehicle, the average bill should decrease by $4 net of
And
the
that's
personal property tax relief.
okay. And that's based on if you kept your car and didn't change anything, I should expect with this change from, was it 56 to 58?
From 58 to 56.
To 56, basically, I should expect about a $4 difference.
$4 decrease, yes.
Decrease. I keep the car, but the car's a year older, et cetera, et cetera.
Correct.
Okay. What is the amount of money, total, again, what is the total revenue we receive? What are you estimating we will receive, what we received this year from this change, and what did we receive last year?
In personal property tax relief funds provided by the Commonwealth, it's the same amount,
Not the
$16.7
personal,
million.
what is the projected revenues from last year and this year?
That is part of the projected revenues. The portion of personal property tax for vehicles from taxpayers is estimated to be about $17.5 million.
17.5 million. And with this change, what will happen? Will it go up or down from that 17.5
The
million?
$17.5 million includes the change.
Includes the change. What did we collect last year?
18.
All right. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yes.
We heard this matter, Madam President, at the Government Operations Committee meeting. As I understand it, just for clarity, the state gives us X number of dollars in terms of tax relief. If we, and the city and finance department tries to figure out through formula how much that computes out percentage-wise to each ratepayer, taxpayer. It comes to this figure of 56 versus 58% that we are charging that taxpayer. If we don't accept that reduction, that change, then the city winds up subsidizing taxpayers. That's all, it's a finite amount of money that we get from the state. And the rate that we're asked to approve is the rate that's calculated by the finance department. Now, I'll stand corrected on this, but that's my understanding. And so if we don't accept this 56%, then we're actually being asked to subsidize automobile owners in the city. Is that correct? Is that another way of expressing what you're trying to say?
I think it's clear on page 2 of the handout. Gives you a history over the last 3 years, plus the estimate for this year. Shows how the rate has decreased in those years, how the Commonwealth's funding of this program has stayed constant, and how finance has spread or tried to spread that funding over the vehicles that we do tax here in the city. So we've tried to keep the rate decreasing in a general blended fashion, where we actually do allow for more relief in the tax bills than what is funded by the Commonwealth.
Mr. Hill, did you have a question?
I did, thank you, Madam President. I did and do. I just want to clarify some remarks that were made earlier, or a question that may or may not clarify. You're saying that the average person would pay $4 less. That's on average.
That's correct.
An individual that owned a car last year that was worth $18,000 at last year, that is now, let's see, down to 16. That $4 is based on the 18,000 each year, is it not? Or are you talking about
The
given the
$4 decrease is net of both factors, the decrease in depreciation of vehicles.
So we are taking that into consideration as well. Okay. Thank you, that clarifies that. Thank you, Madam President.
One more, any other questions? And if we're going to have a discussion on this, we need to have some of it now, but if we do not pass this paper tonight, what's the implication?
The implication is listed on the first page of the presentation. The billing for the personal property tax vehicle bills will be delayed from what we normally want to do with the customer service bills. We want to bill by March 31st. If we delay this, it would go to council presumably March 23rd. That would put us into April for mailing the bills.
So if we delayed this, if we voted this paper down, you would have to introduce a new paper,
That's correct.
which would be introduced the 23rd of March, which would then have to go to finance, which would not be heard till the end of April. So you would not get your bills out on that, correct? And is there any other discussion?
That's correct.
Mr. Tyler?
Short question.
Let Mr. Tyler go. Mr. Carr.
Let Mr. Carr.
Let Mr. Carr.
How much maybe I can-
And we're going to do this for 5 more minutes because we've got a lot more color.
How do you evaluate the vehicles year by year? What guide do you use? Do you use NADA or?
We do use the NADA guide.
Okay, very good, thank you.
President, I'm Bob Vernon in Finance. Actually, this ordinance could be amended and continued until the 23rd meeting. You wouldn't have to reintroduce another ordinance. It would have to delay until April, I don't believe. Am I correct? In other words, if you were to change the percentage, you could amend this particular ordinance and continue it until the 23rd. Is that not correct? Right.
Question.
If I could, I just wanted to clarify one thing that was said earlier. Vehicles today that are greater than 20,000 receive, if they're qualifying vehicles, they receive personal property tax relief, but they're capped at the $20,000 amount.
Question.
I think Mr. Tyler is going to do.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me try this again, and I'm going to try to be clear. You're going from 56, you're going to 56 from 58. What is that 2% difference mean in dollars? If we kept the rate at 58, what's the difference between 58 and 56?
With the average depreciation of the file, ESS values.
Yeah, I mean, if we just said, we're going to hold it at 58, how much income are we taking off the table from the budget? We taking $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, $100,000?
1.4 million.
1.4 million. So that 2% represents $1.4 million difference?
That's correct.
Okay. That's what I needed to hear. Thank you.
It's almost 2 cents. I mean, that's almost a something. Mr. Jones.
I'm trying to understand what Mr. Tyler's issue is with changing this rate from 58 to 56.
Can I try? Okay. And then we're going to go on to the next thing. But last year, you got tax relief 58%. We got the same, the state has, and if I'm wrong, you can tell me, the state has had the same cap for 4 years. But because of the decrease in what vehicles are worth today as opposed to last year, correct?
That's correct.
We have dropped this from giving 58% relief to 56% relief. People will still get a lower bill, but if we kept it at 58%, it would be even lower. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So we're trying to sort of give some to the city in some cases.
And so we would be prepared, if we don't accept this 56% rate reduction, then would that not be tantamount to the city, given that we got a finite pool of money, the city giving the taxpayer a break at our cost?
You would be giving the taxpayer a break, but it would cost us $1.4 million in the budget.
1.4 million short of what the state is giving us. And I'm saying the state,
No, 1.4 million, if we said, okay, we're gonna give 58% relief, all right?
right,
That would cost us 1.4 million, the city,
right,
in uncollected taxes.
right.
So we have gone down to 50, or it's proposed that we go to 56% tax relief. That gives us 1.4 million in income. No, more.
Less than it.
We will still be receiving less.
We'll be receiving less. I shouldn't have gotten into it. We'll be receiving less from the state, but if we leave it at 58%, we will be receiving $1.4 million less from our personal property tax.
Right,
Okay?
right. Which gives us a $1.4 million hole in an already strained budget. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's fine. Is that what we want to do?
Ms. Robinson?
I'd like to put a follow-up question to that. Because I think the question that we are rationally with, if we anticipate revenue shortfalls, why would you why are you proposing a reduction in the rate that will generate less revenue? And how is that impacting the budget?
By reducing the relief rate from 58 to 56%, that's decreasing the amount of tax that we actually forgive the taxpayer.
But you are seeing that it's going to generate a reduction in revenue as well. We anticipate.
That's correct. There are a number of factors here. The assessed value of vehicles have decreased significantly.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And I don't mean to cut anybody off, but we got a lot going here. Okay. Docket.
Item number 5, resolution number 2009-R13 to appoint Orlando Artsy as Commissioner of Richmond Redevelopment and Housing Authority. This paper has been continued until April 13th.
Okay, thanks.
Item number 6, resolution number 2009-R20 to identify tasks critical to the fiscal year 2009-2010 annual budget, impose deadlines, and to request the mayor or the designee to make presentations on the revenue trends and projections for the city's general fund on March 2nd, 2009 and April 6, 2009. This paper is to be amended and considered tonight.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay.
Item number 7, ordinance number 2008-235 to authorize 107 South Colonial Avenue to permit new multifamily dwellings consisting of no more than 4 units. This item is to be continued to the 23rd.
Any questions? Okay.
Item number 8, ordinance number 2008-291 to amend the code to provide partial tax exemption in redevelopment of conservation areas or rehabilitation districts. This paper is also to be continued to the 23rd.
Any questions? All right.
Ordinance number 2008-294 to authorize 1003, 1005, 1011 North Lombardi Street for the purpose of 23 two-family detached dwelling units and accessory parking. This paper has been council amended and continued on March 9th. It's to be heard tonight.
Thank you, and I know that there'll be lots of discussion. to, and I'm going to change this, our agenda a little bit. We need to get the city administration report in. What we do, as soon as we do that, we're then going to have a discussion on the tax rate papers that we're going to put in. So I'm sure that everybody has received a copy of their general fund revenue assumptions. No? Okay. All right, I'm assuming. Yes. Okay.
I have a question.
Did you want to do yours while we're waiting for Rayford? Go ahead, because we're on a tight thing. Mrs. Stroud?
President Council, I fully didn't understand the other thing with the personal property tax. Okay, are we giving the citizens of the city of Richmond a decrease if we do it this way, or we're going to be raising it? It sounds like that we're.
Let me get you after we're done.
No, let's go offline with this.
Let's go offline and I'll explain it to you, okay? Oh, here he is. Okay, Rayford. I'd ask that we'd already asked in the essence of time, let's let Rayford whip through this.
Thank you.
I guess I shouldn't have said that. And then we'll ask questions afterwards, but I'm just reminding everybody we have to determine what tax rate papers we want to put in, and we have a report from Daisy. Okay, Rayford.
All right, members of the council, you have before you the presentation on biennial fiscal plan general fund revenue assumptions. And I'd like to preface that with saying that this is, of course, preliminary. This is our best forecast at the point in time. Things change, as you heard from Dave Rose earlier today. Things are changing over the last 2 weeks with the stock market. The first slide that you see in your handout, and it will be on the screen eventually, is a pie chart. And that pie chart, if you bring just click on the pie chart gives you an overview of exactly what the city's revenue really is. It comes from 3 major sources: real estate taxes, other taxes, which would be your emissions, lodging, meals taxes, and areas such as that, and also intergovernmental revenue. So I want to give you a general snapshot and a picture of how this thing really puts together all of our revenue and where it really comes from. The general fund revenue drivers, as I said, are those 3 items, and they make up 84.7% of the overall city revenue. Again, real estate taxes, other taxes, and intergovernmental revenues are 84.7% of the city's general fund revenue. Your next chart gives you an idea of how the revenue versus actuals has been between FY05 and FY08. As you can see in FY05, that year we exceeded our budget in revenues. FY08 we were below. FY06 we were below. FY07 we were above projections, and FY08 we were above projections. So the big jump between 6 and 7 was when we transferred some of the schools' revenue that used to come directly to schools by way of the sales tax to schools, is running that back to the general fund, which was a better accounting practice at that point in time. Also during that time, we also took the portion of the meals tax that was going to Greco and took that out of the special fund and brought that into the general fund as well. And all the expenses from Greco were a part of the general fund. If you look at FY09, that last blue bar there, what we did, we budgeted FY09 to grow slightly above the actuals of FY08. And that is how we originally started with the FY09 budget. Since that time, if you look at the actual forecast, the forecast looks like it's not going to be near where that original budget was. And as you have heard, part of David Rose's report was that revenue as of December was projected to be about $13 million less than what we originally intended. If you look at the FY 10 and 11 budgets, you can see again another decrease. FY 10 is dropping off primarily because real estate tax assessments are predicted to be down about 5 to 10%. And FY 11 is going to take a little bump up as we anticipate somewhat of a recovery of the overall economy. So you can see from that snapshot the revenue has taken its path up and then coming back down for 10 and 11 and started coming back down in 9. What's driving the adjustments? Well, pretty much the economy. As we've said before, the economy is really driving a lot of our consumer taxes as well as the assessments of the real estate values. And I'm sure as you have been in contact with the assessor, that he will concur that some things are beginning to take a turn downward for the city of Richmond. Some of the things that have been seen previously in other parts of Virginia, or Northern Virginia, they're now beginning to show up down here. And we're just keeping a good eye on that. The preparation of the 10 and 11 budget obviously is predicated on what's going on with the revenue. And again, the three major sources, which drive 87% of this budget, are your real estate taxes, your other taxes, and your intergovernmental revenue. Again, the recession has reduced the city's revenue from real estate assessments. Property taxes have been decreasing, especially in the area of vehicles. And we'll have a little bit more detail on that in a minute. Business license revenue is decreasing as many businesses have also seen a decline in their gross receipts. So as those businesses are suffering, the trickle down from that is also hitting us on our revenue side. Personal property taxes, again, what has happened is that the National Automobile Dealers Association, NADA, the vehicle valuations have decreased by almost 10% since last year. And we have a chart following that, but that is going to be in the areas of those vehicles that obviously were not being able to be sold, the gas guzzlers, your SUVs, your large pickup trucks, as I like to call them, the Ford F-350s, those huge things. And some of the other vehicles also have taken a downward turn. You don't have people buying new vehicles as much as they had been in the past, and you don't have people even just upgrading to a newer used vehicle at the same time. The other vehicle value tracking data confirms the decrease in valuations. Again, the value of these cars is just dropping commensurately, just like the economy is doing. And for 9 and 10, the forecast reflect about a 1.1 million decrease in personal property taxes collected, assuming the rate stays the same. And as a side note, the city has not changed its personal property tax rate since 1992. This chart gives you pretty much a visual snapshot of what the vehicles are doing based upon NADA. As you can see, total down about 6.8%, compact cars 2.2%, mid-size 7.4%, luxury cars down 5%, pickups down 10.2%, SUVs 9.4% down, and vans 13.5% down. So as you can see, those valuations are really beginning to come home to roost. One thing that's probably a good thing, if there is anything in this picture, is that we don't have as many SUVs or pickup trucks or big vans that some of our rural competitors have. And I like to call them our competitors. But as you go out into the rural areas, you will find more trucks and more SUVs to do some of the things that they have to do out there in the counties. And we don't have as many of those in our area. Consumer taxes, again, this is another thing that's driving us with the economy. The decrease in economic activity left citizens with fewer discretionary dollars. As the economy has come down a little bit, you won't have families going out and doing those meals every Friday night. And you won't have them going to the movies every Friday night. They now have to pick and choose which things they will be doing during this economic downturn. So as a result of that, there's slower growth or contraction in the city's consumer taxes. And again, those consumer taxes would be your sales taxes, your admissions taxes, your lodging taxes, and your meals taxes. Meals taxes are down $700,000. That's 3% from the current budget. Sales taxes are up 1.6%, but it's still $1 million below what we originally budgeted. So there is some growth in sales taxes, but not where we anticipated when we first put this budget together. Now, one thing I'd like to tell you that as we look at these things and we track the forecast, it has been very difficult to forecast the sales tax because 1 month the sales taxes will be up, the next month the sales taxes are down. So any of our previous formulas that we would use or any of the trends that we traditionally would use, you almost have to throw those out the door. Because if we just use those trends, those formulas in these days and times, we would still be projecting an upward growth of these taxes. But again, with the up and down and the cyclical nature of this thing, it is very difficult for us to really get a complete handle on some of these things. Lodging taxes are down at 11.6% or $400,000. Again, people are not going out and staying in the hotels, they're not traveling as much as they used to. Admission taxes are down 34.3%, but that's only $800,000 from the actuals. But that also is still above the budget for 09, but it's not anywhere near what we anticipated it to be. Licenses, permits, and fees, again, BPO, business licenses and professional fees are a function of gross receipts from the merchants and the professionals, the contractors, and vendors. And as they suffer through the economic times, then of course their gross receipts are down and the taxes we would receive from them are commensurately down. BPO is projected to be about $3 million short of the 2009 budget, again because economic activity is down. Courts, fines, and fees. These fees, which are mostly for property transfers, are down 25%, or $2.5 million from the FY09 budget. These are the fees that occur when you do property transfers. If you sell a house, there's some recordation taxes that must be paid. Since people are not turning those houses over, the prices are holding steady, but they're just not turning over, so we're not generating those fees at this point in time. And again, that's down 25%. Inspection fees are down 5%, only $800,000 from the 09 budget. So that's the economy in a snapshot as to where we are. And then from that point, we give you some of the true revenue challenges. And crafted this biennial fiscal plan, which we are still in the throes of. The city assessor has confirmed flat assessed values for 2009. However, there's a projected decrease of anywhere between 5 to 10% from 2010. So that is why you see the revenue of the 2010 budget dropping commensurately. Based on a $120 assessment rate and the decrease in assessed value, real estate tax revenue will be $16.3 million less in FY 2010 than FY 2009. And again, that's directly attributable to the decreases in assessed values coming on the graph. So this time next year, when you're looking to put together a tax rate paper, you'll be right in the throes of that $16 million that you see dropping off. Beginning in 2004, and this is just some history for folks that haven't been here before. In 2004, the city started reducing its tax rate, which was a very good thing. We took 18 cents down over that time period, or about 15%, which in essence, at about $2 million per penny, left about $36 million in the taxpayers' pockets. Now this year, with the unfriendly economy, we may not have the luxury of reducing the tax rate due to flat assessments. But the bottom line is, again, this is just history to show you that we have been making an effort between council and administration. We've been doing what we can do to do what we can when we can. Pursuant to section 58.1-3321 of the Code of Virginia, when the real estate assessment would result in an increase of at least 1% in real estate tax levies, the real estate rate is automatically rolled back to the 1% increase unless a public hearing is held. So this is one of the things that you as a council will be discussing this evening, and this chart just gives you an idea of where we are with that. The total adjusted assessed value for 2008 was $19.9 billion. Total adjusted for 2009 is assessed at $20.3 billion. So the percentage rate increase from 2009 to 2008 is 1.77%. The current assessed rate is $120.20 per $100. The current rate divided by the 101.77 for you math quizzes out there, like I am sometimes, minus the 1% gives you a rollback rate of $1.19.1. So that will be your effective rollback rate because at the 120 we were gaining more than 1% in revenue. Real estate assessments are estimated again to drop between 5 and 10% between now and 2010. And just food for thought and just for information only. In order to generate the same total general fund revenue as 2009, you would have to set the tax rate at $1.37.3. And that would just, blow everybody out of the water, as we well know. But it just gives you an idea of what the magnitude of the difference is between now and 2010. And every penny in the real estate tax rate would generate approximately, if you round it, about $2 million in 2009 and about $1.85 million in 2010. So we're looking at a 2010-2011 biennial fiscal plan based on the 120 tax rate. And again, as we like to explain, the tax rate affects 2 different years. Even though next year you will be back setting it again, but the rate you set this year will affect the current year's revenue as well as the budget that we are preparing for 10 and 11. At the 120 rate currently, as of December 31st, the revenue shortfall was assessed at about 13 million. And the proposed budget for 2010 would be 626 million. If we put the proposed rate at 123, then the revenue shortfall for the current year would miraculously go to 6.6 million. And the budget for FY 2010 would be at 631.6 million. If you set the tax rate at 125, that would still leave you with a 2.5 million shortfall in 29. But you'd also look at a possible FY 10 budget of 635.3. Now again, this is just information. It just gives you an idea of what the flow of these things are and how they affect the budgets on both sides of the coin, FY 2009 and 2010. Revenue challenges, some intergovernmental revenue. Historically, most of this revenue is from the state rather than the federal government. The stimulus bill is some good news, if you want to call it that. I'm sure we all like that. And per the HUD website, Richmond Redevelopment Housing Authority, it stands to pick up $10.8 million. Community Development Block Grant stands to pick up $1.3 million. Emergency Shelter Grant stands to pick up $2 million. Now, these are there for the purposes of helping you to understand that there are some things in the stimulus that will come to us. These do not directly impact the general fund, but the point is that there is some money coming that is becoming available for us to use. Other revenue challenges, there's a potential loss. There was a potential loss of over $8 million in revenue from the state because of actions of the General Assembly. Since that time, the General Assembly has come to a consensus. That's Mr. Tower who said that. But they have come to an agreement on the budget. But what still is out there is that the governor must sign those budgets, and then you still have the veto possibilities. So we're still, being now very positive spin on things, looking at there still could be a potential loss of some things out there. And those reductions impact public safety with your House Bill 599 money, and generally human services and education. However, even with the state budget agreement, which is official, it may restore some of the monies, but not all. Again, we like to point out that the government still has to sign these things, and there still is the possibility for vetoes and anything else, just like it carries on to the regular General Assembly process. And this tells us that there still is some uncertainty in one of our top 3 revenue sources. Again, if you remember the pie chart, there were 3 top revenue sources that make up 87% of our budget: the real estate taxes, other taxes, and intergovernmental revenue. So you still have a little degree of uncertainty with one of those top 3 revenue sources. Any further reductions in revenue projections could result in a reduction or elimination of non-mandated services with a possibility of increasing tax rate. That's just a statement. It is not a recommendation. It's just fact. And that's what I want to make sure you understand. I'm just presenting the facts here as much as we know. You just heard from Davenport and Company that talked about trying to grow the rainy day fund. And the mayor's vision for a tier 1 city, as well as I'm sure council's vision, would also be a tier 1 city. One of the things we talked about would be growing the rainy day fund balance up to the 10% level. You've heard the history. It was at 5%. Then we got up to 7%, and we've been growing slightly each year, a little bit at a time. But in order to really get toward that big tier 1 city, that AAA status, we have heard numbers such as maybe in the 10% range is where we want to be. All things saying that and being considered, that's about a $62 million, $63 million rainy day fund that we would like to get to eventually over some span of time. Right now, again, as you heard, it's about $47 million at the present time. And again, it may be necessary to increase the tax rate and dedicate specific increases to the fund balance. That might be one of the ways that you would have to do that. That is just one of the options, as well as any other expenditure cuts that you may come across, and also some consolidation of services. So there are instances where some jurisdictions have just earmarked and dedicated specific tax increases or specific amounts of taxing to a rainy day fund to get it where it needs to be. Responsible fiscal planning, in my opinion, should result in an annual fund balance between 1% and 3%. And by annual fund balance, I mean in any given fiscal year, your revenue over your expenditures ends up being 1% to 3% of your budget. For our purposes, that would be anywhere between $6 million and $18 million of surplus. That would be a good number. Recently, we have been fluctuating in about the $1 million range. So we've been very, very cutting it close, and it's been leaving not as much money to add to the fund balance. But again, this is my spiel on where I think a good fund balance should be. At the end of the year, you should have a 1% surplus. Regional concerns, Chesterfield County is anticipating a 44.9 million decrease in revenue in 2010, and they have proposed a 5.3% decrease in its operating budget. Hanover County's budget is 23.4 million less than the current budget, which is a 5.6% decrease in their 2010 budget. Henrico County is losing $7 million annually from 5 major corporations shutting down or reducing operations. So this slide just tells you that we're not alone in this economic spiral. It's affecting the counties and the metropolitan area all over. So everybody is looking at budgets that are about 3 to 5 to 6% smaller than their current year budget, just because of decreasing revenue. How do we do the adjustments? What we're doing, we're looking at the revenue projections, and based on the latest trends in economic factors where applicable. As we work on this 2010 and 2011 budget, we go back and we look at all of the revenue projections to see where we are. We are trying our best to use as many trends as we have and looking at what's going on in the counties. But once again, as you see the fluctuations from month to month, it's very difficult to really get a good pattern as to where we might be. And again, the projections are really just our best estimates of where we might end up. Updated real estate tax revenues based on information from the city assessor. We have been in contact with him quite a bit to see exactly where he thinks he is, so we know where we think we are. FY 2009 effective budget $652.1 million. FY 2010 proposed, assuming the $1.20 rate, will be $626 million. That is the budget that we are looking at revenue-wise at the present time for 2010. And 2011 will be slightly higher than that, maybe about $632 million. But that's a variance of $22.1 million, just as it stands right now, or a decrease of 4.9%. And just again, to throw that alarming thing out there, just to keep things even, the tax rate would have to be $1.37.3, which I mean is completely mind-boggling when you look at what you have to do just to stay where you are. It is mind-boggling. But again, we're looking at everything we can do. Major revenue variances, mostly decreases. Again, the real estate taxes dropping off about 18 million. Personal property taxes down about 2.1 million. BPOL, business license down about 3 million. Local office sales tax about $300,000, and that's a bonus for us. Machinery and tools tax up a little bit, about 1.8 million. Meals tax down about 700,000. Courts, fines, and fees, again, with the property not turning over, down about 2.7 million. Inspection fees, 600,000 down, and state revenue for social services at about $4.3 million down. The unknowns, again, we can only presume the full impact of the revenue shortfall at the state level. So the intra-governmental revenue is something that we can't necessarily control, so we can only presume at this point in time where we are, and we can only presume the final full impact of the stimulus funds. We know there will be some things coming down the pipeline. As we heard today, we don't want to get locked into depending upon stimulus funds for ongoing programs, because you lock yourself back into where you've been in the same situation in future years. But what we would like to look at, probably the most effective thing would be to look at those one-time things, those, for lack of better words, the quick and dirty things that you apply those stimulus funds to that will give you some relief on your capital budget or your operating budget. So this is and has been and will continue to be one of the most difficult budget cycles due to the extended economic situations. And as you well know, there were several people that would bet that the stock market would not go below 7,000. I was not one of them because I'm not a betting man, but it took a turn within the past 2 weeks. So a lot of the things that we were looking at just 2 weeks ago, we're still sitting there scratching our heads and trying to do what we can do. Revenue monitoring has become a weekly task. Mr. John Cahotis, who's our city economist and revenue analyst, he works very closely with Dan Van Dornick in Finance Department, as well as Bob Herndon, and many of the Finance Department revenue folks to really get an eye weekly to see where we're going and see what trends are pre-developing. We don't want to wait till they're developing trends. We want to try to catch them as they're pre-eminent, pre-emerging, if there is a word such as that. But that basically is it in a nutshell. Again, the picture is revenue down next year, and that's what we have, man.
I just want to thank you for all that pleasant news. It's really been an exciting time with you. I'm going to ask my fellow, we're going to ask you some questions, I'm sure. I'm going to ask if we could limit the questions to no more than 15 minutes, because as I keep saying, we need to discuss the tax rate, and Daisy has an update to give us also. So with that, questions? Ms. Robinson?
Mr. Harris, on page 28, or slide 28, the major revenue variances, is this based on your projection of revenue that you anticipate for this year's budget or for 2010?
Madam Vice President, this is next year's budget.
Any other questions? Mr. Jewell?
I'm still weeping over here. I know this is more long range, but it seems to me that every census, Richmond comes up real short. Has there been any consideration to the dollars that we get back from the Fed through our census count? And is that figured in here anywhere? And are we, I know it's not for you to deal with, as to what council and administration can do to improve our count. We're always undercounted, and I understand something like $2,200 per capita that we lose when we fail to count everybody. Is any of that included in?
That is not included here, Mr. Jewell, but what we do is we kind of keep an eye on things like that as well. Bearing in mind the census is coming up every 5 years, every 10 years, we want to also make sure, obviously, everybody is counted, which is not just a city and city administration, city council job, but it's everybody's job. So to the extent that we can go back and see any degradation in any, for lack of better words, entitlements coming from the federal government based on the census, then we will be right on that to follow up as well.
And secondly, Madam President, if I may, the stimulus that we keep talking about, there appears to be two sides of it. One is capital projects, would be capital projects. The other would be operating. I saw a list of capital projects that were submitted. I've yet to see the operating requests that have been made. Have we, the city, made those requests? I assume we have. And if so,
no, we haven't made those requests at this point in time, and my answer to that, and I can't be the full person to answer this question, is when you look at the government's website, there were certain categories under which you had to apply this first time going through. And a lot of those dealt with infrastructure, transportation, healthcare technology, and green type funding for those types of projects. So to the extent that we have the opportunity to go forward and start looking for things from an operational standpoint, then we will be right on that as well. And again, I want to caution us, as the council has already said, you don't want to look at ongoing things that you go grab money for, because that just puts you back in the cycle again when that money dries up. But you want to look at those things that could be those one-time, sticks in the arm that really give you a boost to take care of some issues. Right?
on the operating side, the reason I'm asking is that I want to make sure that we're not behind the curve on the schedule. But two, that council get an opportunity to input into requests being made on the operating side.
Yes, sir, and I'll make sure I keep that under advisement and make sure I notify Ms. Dinsmore and others that we want to make sure we keep that front and center.
Thank you.
Mr. Connell, any questions?
Mr. Harris, good to see you this afternoon. As always, thank you for the good information that you provide. In your presentation, you mentioned that revenue projections for FY 2009 were minus $13 million. What you didn't mention was how much is being saved on the expense side in FY 2009.
What we're doing on the expense side is a couple of things we have done already in place. One is the hiring freeze that we've implemented, and that's beginning to show me some turnaround in my projections on the personnel side. The reason for the slow turnaround on that side is because when we put the budget together for 29, we already took out 6% of turnover savings off the top. So it takes a little while for that hiring freeze to start showing some returns on that. The other things that we have looked at is some of the capital, the debt money. I do believe at this point in time that we have recognized, or will be recognizing, probably about $3 million in debt savings on that side. We also have a few things in non-departmental that we have some control over and some leeway over that we can take care of by not having the spending going out as quickly. One of those things was we looked at a couple of ways to do some retiree health care things. Now, again, having said that, don't get to a panic mode. Retirees have their health care coverage, and it will be paid for. I want you to understand that. But as a part of putting the budget together last year, we had some additional funds in that particular global thing dealing with retirees that we won't have to spend, and some of those things are dealing with, for lack of better words, OPEB, gas, and 45 assumptions.
So my question right here, as you stand here, what is the delta between the $13 million revenue shortfall projection and the amount of money you saved on the expense side? What is your current delta?
At the last quarterly report, which was the December report, there was a delta of about $9 million. Since that time, we've brought it back down again. There's $3 million savings in debt, which takes basically the delta down to $6 million. And there's probably about $1 million or $2 million savings in non-department and other things. The other leg of that three-legged stool is that we have also started reviewing all the open encumbrances that are out there in the current year's budget. And what we are asking agencies to do is to go back, scrub those, and we're counseling as many of those encumbrances as we can to delay or defer or not even do any of the spending. So we have gone back, and there should be a memo coming out probably shortly, one to each of the directors, giving them further details on those instructions. And as we look at the third quarter forecast, we will see exactly how much that's bringing us back in line. So we have implemented a lot of things, but until we really get to the third quarter, we won't see the true impact of where we think we're coming in.
So we back in the napkin, we're about 4.5 short.
I would hazard a guess and say maybe along those lines, but again, I have to go back and look at all the numbers again in the third quarter. But we have put some things in place to start alleviating the issues.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Khan?
Do we have any projections on the combining, outsourcing fleets and also purchasing? Do you factor any of that into your figures? Savings on some of those things?
That's going to be inherently a part of putting the budget together. Some of the things that we're looking at as we put this budget together is, as an example, almost every department has a photocopying machine, a Xerox machine, for lack of better words. We're looking at possibly even just putting one on every floor instead of having one in every department. Things such as that. We're also going to look inherently at having consolidation services possibly with the school system. Those types of things that we can do to really minimize the impact on expenditures and generate some savings. So as a part of putting this biennial budget together, we are looking at those things to see what we can do to get better bang for our buck. Specifically with fleet, that hasn't been looked at in detail as doing anything such as privatizing or seeing what can be done there. But all of those things are on the table as far as things you can do that can either be privatized or consolidated with other jurisdictions, other entities, such as schools or the ambulance authority, the GRTC. So we're looking at many different things that will bring us some economies of scale as we go forward. I think, the biggest thing that we have to deal with overall with the budget is just the fact that the revenue really is not there. And, to the extent that you're dealing with that issue, you're going to inherently become more efficient and as you go along. Now, one thing I'd like to say as a part of my overall budget spiel is always have to take the opportunity to do. We look at this budget very carefully, and sometimes there is a misconception or a misunderstanding that we may be overly, for lack of better words, fat. But over the years, since I've been in budget, and even prior to me coming back to budget the second time, we really took a good look at a lot of the services and a lot of things that we have done, and we have leaned down tremendously. And if you look back over the years, you can see at some point in time, and I looked at a newspaper clipping from 2001, and I took it to somebody the other day, Mike Terry, and it said city has a $16.2 million surplus. What are we going to do with it? And those were the good old days. But now we're down to, maybe a $1 million, $2 million surplus, which is smaller than 1% of our general fund budget. So we have gotten lean. Can we do something else to do better? I'm sure we can. But we are at the point now that, some of these things we're doing, you're almost, cutting off your nose to spite your face. Previously, when I was in budget, when we budgeted for personnel services and positions, we budgeted 100%. No turnover was taken out because we knew at some point in time during the fiscal year, there might be some things that would creep up. And that savings from having the vacancy still in your budget allowed agencies the flexibility to take care of a major snowstorm or to take care of a major overtime cost. But over the years, we've started budgeting turnover and taking it out in funding positions at less than 100%. So we've kind of taken away a lot of the, the previous little cushions, for lack of a better word, that we had. But we are still looking to see what we can do to be leaner. And this budget is going to force you to do
can you just a breakdown of that's sales taxes and personal property taxes, cigarette taxes? Okay. There's something, I know we get something, do we not? I think we get something.
Your question is, you want to know what other taxes there are?
Right, of this $204 million in other
Okay.
taxes, what is that comprise?
Well, a lot of the biggest number is the personal property, which Mr. Van Dorn talked about earlier today. That's about $45 million. There are also the taxes we get from prepared food, lodging, admission, the things that Mr. Harris talked about in PowerPoint. We collect a little bit from state recordation and some utility franchise taxes, consumer taxes, that is, electric and cable and
I mean, and I appreciate the presentation. It sounds like, though, that I mean, this is assuming that all of this burden, if you will, is going to be placed on the property owners. And I'm concerned about that as a concept.
Oh, no, not at all. As we are putting together the budget, one of the things we also looked at is the number of vacancies that have been in the system for years, and just taking those positions out. If you look at, for example, a public works department or a record parks or a general services department, some of your high turnover departments had positions out there for years that were just sitting in the system. And it's not they weren't needed, but the minute you fill one, the two go vacant, and you fill another one, so you constantly have the cycle of 70 to 80 positions vacant. So that is one of the things that we look at, is just taking those off the books as a starter. That's the low-hanging fruit. We've also looked at asking the agencies to provide us with other recommendations for reductions of they can do things. Discretionary spending, travel, training. If training is not necessary to retain a certificate, then we got to look at backing those things up. You know, furniture, PCs, all those things are what we're looking at as we put together the future budget.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to imply that we weren't looking at other things on the expense side. But what I'm saying is that the analysis of what our real estate tax rate would have to be, it would be projecting that all the other revenue remains flat.
Yeah, and we, I picked that just as, because that's normally what everybody keys in on. Now, obviously, if you could do anything with those other revenue sources, then we would look at those as well. But when you look at primarily those being the major drivers, that was the main reason we looked at that. But there are other taxes out there that they may be growing slightly, but not to the extent that you would get revenue as you would from a real estate or intergovernmental tax.
Historically, and you may not know this right off the top of your head, do the sales taxes increase? Are they a pretty good indicator of a recovery? Are they going to be at the front end of that recovery versus our real estate coming back, or are we going to have the real estate come back before the sales?
I'll yield to the economists, but one thing about the sales taxes, again, we've seen it up one month and down the next, so it's really hard to get a good read on it. But the economists are sitting on it really
Well, to answer your question, just so you understand the size of the magnitude here, real estate tax is about $240 million, property tax is about $45 million, and that includes the tax relief portion that we get. The sales tax is including that's the 1% that we collect from in the city, as well as the shared sales tax statewide. That's about $50 million or so. And those things vary at best a few percentages. So the budget was built with a growth of a few percentages and it's been flat. So a couple percent of the $50 million is at best a couple $1 million. So that's why we kind of focused in on the real estate and the property and just examples.
And I would also like to add, being the closet economist that I am, that the sales tax is not necessarily going to be a good indicator of things always turning around, because people have to make those decisions. I'm either going to go out and eat dinner, or I'm going to buy some things that I can go ahead and purchase. The thing that you're also looking at is, if you have equipment at home, maybe you don't need to buy a new lawnmower this year. You can, let it ride another 2 or 3 years, but you will still go out and have dinner with your family. So it alone is not necessarily an indicator that things will be turning around. In my opinion, it's going to have to be all of those. to the extent that real estate, and again, we received something from the realtors not too long ago, that said that the value of the house is pretty much staying the same, it's just that they're not turning over as much. So, I mean, even looking at something like that, you would say, well, it shouldn't be too bad if they kind of holding the value but not turning over. But it's just so many different variables in this economy that, you know, you really have to be a sit down all day long economist to really see what things are really going to have impact and really turn you around.
And to be clear about the assessor's projections of falling between 5 and 10%, that includes, you're not assessed on property that is under construction. You, if your property is still in construction, if you don't have certificate of occupancy at the end of the year, then your property is assessed as if none of those improvements were made. So that includes all of the new construction that we're doing. That number doesn't make up for the total revenues falling. So it sounds like that home prices may go down by more than that 5 to 10%, but that the new construction number will make up for some of that. Is that?
That's kind of it. What it really is, I assume that the stock of property, real property that is going to drop between 5 and 10%, and I think I picked about 9% based on the trends that I've seen. And there is, as you said, there is growth. There are new construction, there are new developments, and so that cushions it a little bit. So instead of seeing a full 9% drop, you may see about 7% drop.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to put it off.
Thank you, Madam President.
Yeah, because it's 5:15, and I'm sure that Mr. Harris would be happy to answer any questions that anybody has. He's always at the ready when I call, so I'm sure he'd be happy to answer any questions. Right. Thank you, Mr. Harris. Thanks for that excellent and stimulating presentation. Okay. Now we're going to take 15 minutes and talk about the tax rate. As you all know, tonight we have to introduce the papers proposing a tax rate for 2010. I know that the mayor has put in a paper proposing $1.20. Ms. Robertson, as head of finance, and myself have had some discussions and feel that we should have a few more options, and so we were looking at proposing $1.21, $1.20, and $1.19. And with that, I know I sent everybody an email on that. Mr. Tyler responded. I believe he was the only one that responded. Tyler, I was looking at you, but I said, but did you respond to that? I didn't see it, I'm sorry. Or maybe I did, and I forgot. So, anyway, I'm going to open it up to discussion in terms of, I guess the discussion would be, do we want to have 3 papers with those 3 options, or are there council people that are looking at other options? So, it's open. Open mic.
Well, since you've already referenced me, Madam President, may I go ahead and get started?
Please do.
All right, thank you. As you know, we've had several emails back and forth with regards to this. And I think there are a lot of variables here, and we don't have a handle on any position at this point in terms of are we going to an impervious fee tax? Is that going to be included in the mayor's budget? I don't know yet. I've heard some people say yes, I've heard some people say no. I've heard other folks talk about that the assessed value of property is not going down, that the assessor has presented today, or as the paper was presented today. And again, that's crystal balling out next year. I feel like at this point, because we don't have a budget in our hand, and we have no understanding of where we're going other than we've been told 623 million. Well, we have no idea how it's broken down, how it's being used. I would like to have the flexibility to use, to go 4 cents below the current tax rate. So $1.16, it would be the lowest, $1.17, $1.18, $1.19, $1.20, and then I said 1 penny above because I don't know where it's going to land. I'd be willing to go on on the upper end too, if others feel we need to have more flexibility. I think we need to tell the taxpayers, because we are not in a position, having seen any budgets, that we need to have as much flexibility here as opposed to limiting ourselves out of the gate. And so that's why I've proposed in my email back to the president that we have that range in the tax rate. If the budget was in my hand, I might have a different feeling. And as I said to the president and council, as I sit here tonight, I am clueless of where the tax rate needs to be. I have no feel one way or the other. Should it go up? Should it go down? Should it remain the same? So I'm looking to make sure I have flexibility in the game before I get eliminated. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tallman. I think we need to have a discussion on those with the lower end ones first. But I just want to remind everybody that the mayor's budget is $26 million less than the budget we passed last year. That they are projecting that we're going to be about $30 million short in revenue from last year, from this year. And personally, I just think we need to keep in mind that we do not give the taxpayers expectations which would be impossible to reach. Personally, I think if we go too low or too high, we are setting expectations up for the tax holders which we will not be able to meet. So, Mr. Collins.
Yeah, based on the information we have, which is very little, I mean, concrete sort of stuff, I would be, I think $1.20, leave it at that. And, if we have, I feel comfortable with $1.20. I really feel comfortable raising it or lowering it tremendously. So that's where I stand, $1.20.
Okay. Mr. Sanders?
Madam President, I think Mr. Tyler made a good point about having this flexibility, and as often is the case, he has swayed me that having more than a 1 cent decrease option is a good plan. I think that it would be wise, although perhaps not politically prudent, to make sure we have that same flexibility the other way. I don't foresee any reason for us to have to raise the tax rate, but I do not want to be stuck in a situation where we cannot.
Okay, so where would you want to go? Do you want to go, Mr. Talley wants to go to $1.16. Do you want to go to $1.16, or where do you want to go?
I don't
want to go to $1.18?
We can go as low as you want to go.
I'm asking you because we're going to take a consensus on it. I'm asking you how low do you want to go?
I don't think we need to go below $1.18, but I'm not going to raise the fuss if we make more options.
And what would you do on the high side?
I wouldn't do more than the same $1.22.
$1.20, what? Did you say $1.27?
No, 800 per $100. $1.22.
Okay, thanks. All right, Mr. Gilbert.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm not understanding this range idea here. Are we talking about not setting the rate tonight, or are we just talking about range?
We have to put in papers tonight so that they can be advertised for 30 days. We have to put in papers tonight that will set the tax rate. For an example, if we put in a paper for $1.21, $1.20, $1.19, then when we vote, it will be one of those three. If we put in a paper for $1.25, $1.24, $23, $22, $21, $20, and so forth, then we have all of those options. Each tax rate, I believe, is a separate paper. So that is,
all right.
it's a part of.
Explanation. And before we vote on this, we will have the budget.
No, we have to set this tonight.
I'm sorry. I know we have to set
We have to
range.
Right, before we set the tax rate.
We are not passing the tax rate before we get the.
I misunderstood your question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm okay with the rates that have been mentioned so far. I'd prefer that we not have, this step of 8 different papers. I think we ought to go. I think $1.21 is as high as I would be comfortable with, and I guess I'd like to limit it to maybe 4 or 3 options, but we could go down as low as $1.18.
Okay.
I could look at that, thank you.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes, I like the ranges that you proposed, Madam President. To say that we don't have a clue, notwithstanding the fact that we don't have a budget, sort of somehow misses the point. Clues all over the place. There are departments that are really straining. We cut big time in the whole budget office last time around. Yet they're asked to do more to find ways of getting us out of the schmutz. We had 100. We had 100 people.
Define schmutz now.
Schmutz. We've been in a mess. We're headed for a mess, I can tell you that. The building in public works, building maintenance and cleaning. We had 100 people for over 85 buildings. I'm told we're cut down to 12 people. Yes, we've got contractors, but they're in and out. They're in and out, and so there are all sorts of ways we're trying to cut money. And then I heard, and this is something I'm with you, Mr. Hillman, I want to see that budget because I'm hearing that there might be a request that we do a 10% across the board cut. That kind of talk scares me to death. When, again, we've got a record park system that is undermanned. And kids acting up with nothing to do. Teenagers. So we've got a lot of work to do on that budget, but I don't see us being in the dark about what we got to do here. We ought to keep it at minimum where it is. I'm not asking that we consider drawing up on it, but between 119, 120, 21 is reasonable.
Thank you, Mr. Newton. Ms. Scarves?
Madam President, I agree with keeping the proposed between 119 and 120.
Ms. Chadwell?
Yes, Madam President. This was in a Times Dispatch, I believe it was yesterday, and the city of Richmond's $1.20, Petersburg's $1.35, and everyone else is, just way below. I cannot see, with the way the city of Richmond is right now, the citizens losing their jobs and not having money to pay their rent, pay for their food, their medicine, I think, and plus they're struggling to hold on to their homes. We need to look at this chart. I don't know if you all seen this, but it's breathtaking to see some of the ones like, my gosh, you look at New Kent, you look at Henrico, Hanover, Chesterfield, they're all lower than us. Like I said, the two highest is Richmond and then Petersburg. I would agree to lower it, $1.16, $1.18, seriously, and not dare go over $1.20. Because we're here to represent the people in the city of Richmond. And to raise this over $1.20 or even $1.20, not to come down, this is disservice to the citizens of Richmond who are trusting us to do the right thing. So I want to lower it as low as we can take it.
Thank you, Ms. Chadwell. Ms. Robinson?
Madam President, as you mentioned earlier, one of the things that I think is important that we take into consideration is the fact that for any reductions, we're talking $2 million. We remember the challenge that we faced last year in trying to put extra money back into the budget to cover things that we wanted to see taken care of. And I must admit, last year when the budget came to us, I was one that voted in support of the lower of the most of my colleagues were willing at that time to go. And a lot of it was because of the access spending that was wasteful, that we knew that was outside of the budget. But I do think that the city staff, as well as the report that we received from Davenport, the handwriting is on the wall. We are really in a tough spot right now. We really are in a tough spot. And I believe that it would, for us to present as much as a reduction of an additional above the 30 million that we're already forecasting that are going to be a shortfall just because of the economy, for us to present a tax rate that would add at least another $8 to $10 million to it by going down to 16 cents, $1.16. Is a cut of $40 million that we're talking about making in the budget next year. So the bottom line is, wherever we go, the reduction in the revenue is going to mean that that's an additional $40 million that we're talking about cutting out of the budget for services, for employees, for whatever services that we're currently spending that $40 million on. So, and I think it's time that, and this is the reason why, Madam President, that I suggested at our retreat that we have a public hearing to talk more detail about tax rates and help the citizens to understand the pitch that they're in, and to help them to appreciate that we're concerned about their budget, what to pay their utilities and keep their lights on and keep their roof over their heads. But at the same time, helping them to appreciate for every $1 million that we take off the table, what $1 million of services we're going to reduce as a result of it. And try to come to a point of helping everybody to understand that situation. So I don't want to give the citizens a false hope. I really don't want to give them a false hope in this economy that we're dealing with. And so, our rollback rate is $1.19. And in some cases, I don't think it's fair to compare us to Henrico County and some of the other counties as it relates to the tax rate. When we talk about the poverty in the city of Richmond being at 23, our revenue sources and the money we can tap into doesn't compare. So I support this recommendation of 19 to 21 cents for the tax rate.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. All right, what we're going to do now is, I think this might be a good way to do it. We have to introduce a paper for each tax rate. So when I say a tax rate, if you would be willing to sponsor that paper, if you would raise your hand, then we'll know if we have five sponsors for tax rate. No. I mean, yeah, right, okay. Right, okay. All right.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
Madam President, I'm sorry. I'm trying to understand. I understand that we, as a body, will ultimately vote on the tax rate. But as a councilman, I believe I have the right to introduce any paper.
Absolutely, Mr. Tyler.
Okay.
I did not say you did not have.
Okay.
I did not say that. All I'm trying to say, all I'm asking is, if we want, who wants to put in a paper for $1?
Okay.
Who wants to put a paper in for $1.19? Who wants to put in a paper for $1.21? That's all.
Okay.
Put your name on the paper, don't put your name on the paper. There you go. Okay? All right, all those who want to put their name on a paper for $1.20 tax rate. Okay. All those for $1.21. Are you getting these, Haskell? All right, put on $1.20 again. $1.20.
Give them $1.20.
I jumped in at 120. Okay. All for $1.21. Did you get that, Haskell? Okay. All for $1. Yeah. Did you get it?
Do it again?
$1.21. You got Connor, Samuels, Marty, Bruce, myself. Would you like to be a page on this, Ms. Barnes? That way you Haskell knows who to come in. You want to do the right? $1.20.
Mr. Tyler, Mr. Samuels, Mr. Gifford, Mr. Marciano, Mr. Jewell, Ms. Robinson, Ms. Squire,
That's $1.20. All right, $1.21.
Tyler, Mr. Samuels, Ms. Marciano, Mr. Jewell, Ms. Robinson, Ms. Squire, and Ms.
Okay. $1.19. If you can hold them up so we can get $1.19.
No.
Everyone except Mr. Jewell. Okay, we'll go down first and then we'll go up. $1.18. Raise your hand if you'd like your name on the paper. That's Gilbert, Tyler, and Travel. $1.17. Tyler. And $1.16, did you say, Mr.
I'll
Jones?
stop it.
Stop at 17?
Since
Okay.
I'll be the only paper on that.
Okay. All right, going up, was there anybody for $1.22? All right, Ed is Travel, $2.17. Okay, up, $1.22. Okay, that's it. Got it? All right, thank you very much. I didn't mean to rush anybody, I just, we got this clock going. Okay, I didn't mean to. All right.
Come on.
Okay, Daisy, your turn.
You got 2 seconds.
I'm sorry, Daisy, your time is up.
Okay, that's fine. I've handed out a number of things, and all I will do is just make sure you all know what you've received. There's something called Report to City Council, 3/9. A number of handouts, a lot of it is just updates. General Assembly. I provided for you a report from Advanced Strategies. Behind this is one of my attachments. Ron Jordan has highlighted all of the significant things that have happened at the General Assembly today. He will be back in April after the budget is completed and the government has gone through his signatures on the 3 things I'm going to mention, just to be sure everybody is aware of it. RMA bill, which would have revised the composition of the RMA, was defeated. The state of sales tax bill was passed. Nuclear transportation bill in the House and the Senate, it was tabled by the House as requested by the patron, stricken from the Senate as requested by the patron. The rest of the bills are all highlighted in your handout. Okay. A little bit of follow-up on the retreat. I provided for you all a little sort of a pocket handout. I've given you handouts of that as well. Council agreed to 4 priority areas, including anti-poverty, community development, economic development, and education. So I provided for you a little pocket listing of those things. That pocket thing has the priorities on the back and the goals. The council outlined them at the retreat. I think it's really with the mayor's discussion about the anti-poverty initiative, as well as the presentation by David Rose, and the fact that council has listed anti-poverty as one of their overarching priorities is, well, it's kind of neat. I will say that these goals probably need refinement. There is some holes, but this is where we left it last week. But as we work through this over the next 4 years, staff will continue to look in these 4 major areas unless council tells us it's something different. We will continue to work on refining the goals and the work plans and the activities that need to come under these 4 major areas that council has set. On the back of this little pocket handout, we've listed all of the members of council. We've also listed the mission and the vision, which council accepted a few years ago. So I think this is a pretty important document. On the 8.5 by 11 page, we did list the action steps that you all discussed at your retreat in those 4 major priority areas. You see the completion date as you go through this little 8.5 by 11 paper, a lot of the completion dates. That's one of the places we're missing holes. That needs to be tightened up, but hopefully we can continue to work with you all in the committees to tighten up this document, and that we will be tracking progress in these 4 areas as we move through this council's term. Any questions on that? I did ask you all, I sent an email out asking for evaluation of that planning session, because my understanding is from you all, you probably want to do something again around September, October timeframe. And if you didn't get a chance to give me your evaluative comments, I'll leave a little green card at your desk, and hopefully you will give me your comments, and this will help us as we move forward, as we plan what needs to happen next. A couple of other reminders. We started the pre-filing legislative process, which is a little bit different in terms of how staff receives the request from you all, how we do an internal briefing statement from you all. We had a couple of things to come in this week, and Mr. Tyler, I think the staff did prepare for you an internal briefing paper, and we'll need to get back to you on how you want us to proceed. But the process is that we receive the request, we do internal briefing, and then the analyst will write a request for an ordinance or resolution, which is then submitted to the city attorney for the completion of the paper, which is brought before council. And that's the process that council agreed to last month, and so we're trying to work through that process. Any questions about that? Okay. The next item that I had listed under reminders had to do with let me go back before I go to reminders. I wanted to mention a couple of other attachments I have for you all. The stimulus information. I've included in the package Governor Kane press release from Friday, where he brought us up to date with what's happening on the state level. On page 2 of my handout, I've also included a number of websites, that federal website as well as the state website, where all of the current data is listed. As you all heard today, the categories for stimulus funding are quite a few. If you look on page 2 of my handout, I've listed all of those categories. Citizens are impacted, everything from unemployment to Medicaid, and there's an infrastructure and education and so on and so forth. All of those various categories are listed on page 2 of my report, which is followed by the governor's press release, if you didn't see that, and also followed by VML's latest update, which is page 6 of my handout. But VML and VACO as well will be very helpful in sending us up-to-date information on how the localities of Virginia are impacted as they know it. Mr. Jewell mentioned the infrastructure list from administration, and I've included that for everybody's information as well. So you also have that there in front of you. So there's a lot of information out there, but as I said before, it's changing all the time. And the governor has a team of folks who are calling through all of this information for impact of Virginia. And I would imagine at some point the city is going to have the same kind of team calling through all of the information to make sure that nothing is left out. But the stimulus funding will be coming in from in various ways. So you have that list from the city administration as well. Okay, going back to reminders, standing committee reports, I've discussed it with Ms. Robson and Ms. Graziano. We're going to try in April to do something a little bit different at the informal meeting, in that each of the staff members who's assigned to a standing committee will come in and do a very brief update for council of what's going on at the committee. And hopefully we'll see how that works starting in April, and then decide what to do from there.
Just so I can jump in for a minute, that's so that the people who are not on the committee have a good idea of what happened. I know that Rita had a public safety, a very lengthy presentation by animal control. We don't have a lengthy presentation, but it would be great to get a synopsis of what happened so that everybody's on the same page. So that we thought maybe this would make it happen.
And the last thing I just wanted to remind you of, there are really only 4 months remaining in this fiscal year. Staff has gives each council member and each liaison the update of your district expenditures on a monthly basis. Before you know it, it'll be the end of the fiscal year. we'll get a closing calendar out, which typically we need to know what expenditures are happening for this fiscal year. I think it's probably by the end of May. I don't remember the calendar exactly offhand. But I just wanted to make you aware, as you receive these monthly reports from us, that you all are also aware that only 4 months left in this fiscal year, and hopefully your funds are, being spent with that in mind. We will be, I've listed the major budget activities, and where especially the people assigned, council staff assigned to the Finance Committee, will be very busy over the next few months after we receive the mayor's budget in supporting council and reviewing of this budget as well. Are there any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, David. With that, I'm going to, is there any other business somebody would like to bring